Kevin, on the monetizing of the life in a day of, because clearly it's all at your end, isn't it? I mean, how did you get that financed?
Well, because it was the sort of first of its kind, that was
And you were
easier.
an Oscar winner, I mean, to be fair.
No, Ridley Scott had a lot to do with it. You know, I mean, Ridley is a big name in movies, and having him attached to it. But because it was a collaboration with YouTube right from the beginning, they came in with half of the money, and they then found us a sponsor, LG, for the other half of the money. And actually, you know, the film was envisaged as a kind of experiment, and as something that would show at a few film festivals, be of interest to people, maybe at events like this, but wouldn't necessarily have a larger commercial life to it. But it's turned out to be the opposite of that, actually. That we've shown at these festivals, it's had a huge audience response. It's a very emotional experience, actually, watching the film. It is a movie in that regard. It works as a movie.
Because it does take the arc from dawn.
Yes, and it goes through the full gamut of human emotions that we're all likely to feel in our lives. You know, whether it be love, fear, death. Illness, and death. And there's a lot of death, obviously, in it, because that is a large part of our lives. And so people have found it very emotional. And so, somewhat to our surprise, the film has taken on this commercial life, and distributors, traditional, conventional, old world distributors, have bought it in a lot of countries and are showing it in cinemas. So it's coming out here in a month. It's coming out in Russia, as I said. It's coming out in the US, and then it will it'll launch, I think, on DVD simultaneously with it being available free on YouTube. So this is going to be very interesting to see whether, because it's available free, will people still buy it? Can that model work? I mean, the traditional movie making gurus would tell you no, it won't work, but it's a fascinating thing to see, and I think it may.
So just in terms of just looking at YouTube as a phenomenon and how it has driven things forward, can you see what will take over from YouTube? Because it's still very much the kind of place to go, isn't it?
I think, you know, ultimately watching video is still a passive experience.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, what Kevin is doing is fascinating because it uses that medium to create an engagement with users. Game, you know, and interactive entertainment in general, whether it is, you know, on your TV, through a console, on your mobile phone, or on the web, is a much more engaging medium. And it's interesting because all of us on the panel, you know, a few years ago would have been running our different businesses without talking to each other. And now we're essentially competitors because we're competing for ultimately people's time. And people's time is as a function of the quality of the content, first and foremost, you know, the artist and the passion point. But it's also a quality affected by the level of engagement of your players with that passion point. So it's one thing, you know, to care about the movie, but it's another thing to spend hours and hours and hours submitting content. I'm interested in the day where you have mass editing and where people spend even more hours, you know, editing the content. But people want to get engaged in around the things they care about, and they just a few years ago didn't have the tools, and now they're getting the tools.
But this is interesting from a point of view of a commercial player like Lego, is that actually the idea of launching a product, something you manufacture and buy now, without the kind of 360-degree would be unimaginable now, isn't it? It has to have that, and yet you'd never have thought that 10 years ago.
No, absolutely. I think it is truly game-changing, and I think the way I think about it in our world, which is still, you know, traditional toys, if you like, is that we want to be irresistible and irreplaceable. We want to be sure when that dinner table conversation is happening, which brand did you touch this week? That we are remembered, and that if we were to go down again, which we were nearly doing, that people will actually write us letter and say, please don't die. Because that's the ultimate accolade you can get. And I think that's what you're saying, Sebastian, is that you need to have that level of interaction to generate that level of passion. It's not enough to entertain, it's about engaging and interacting.
And Tim, on the use of the net as well, you know, versus television, it's quite possible that actually people will coalesce around the net and not the television in 10 years' time and create their own. I mean, the whole idea of pulling in different, you know, you watch a wildlife program, but you can actually pull in clips from David Attenborough, you can pull in tickets to the zoo.
Yeah.
The whole thing, the screen becomes an enabler to do lots of different things.
Yeah, and as we know, you know, television is now going to have internet access built in, and sort of you can get into the semantics of what's a television and what's a monitor. But you're right, and I think that it's therefore, from my point of view, very important to, in a sense, come back to what's your core business, which is creating ideas which are platform neutral. And for my business, you know, it's 95% of the revenue we make has been this television traditional model, but it's changing. And I think it's important to think of ideas as being part of a conversation. I think that, I can't remember if I've said this or not, but one of our thoughts is that in a way we spend too much time trying to start conversations when they're already happening. So Big Brother, for example, you know, why have a Big Brother website you'd set up when actually there's plenty of websites where Big Brother's being discussed. There's Digital Spy, there's Twitter, whatever. Actually, why don't we just use them and be part of their conversation rather than say, no, you're supposed to discuss it here? Do you mind coming over here because we want to chat? You know, it doesn't work. So you're right. I genuinely believe that for creative people, it's an exciting time. I really believe that if your skill is about having ideas and being able to envisage them and make them happen, it actually just means people can enjoy them and interact with them in a far more meaningful way than they've ever been able to do. And I think this social layer that we're now looking at is absolutely revolutionary. It feels like it's finally kicked into gear, and actually we can all have some fun.
I was going to say that I think one of the biggest trends is that, you know, we're moving away from hit creation to sort of nurturing a hit, because it's too expensive to create a hit, because you're going to miss so many times, and you can only afford so many misses before you run out of cash. And so by nurturing a hit and by listening to, you know, what the Big Brother community is saying or what the Lego community is doing, you don't have to come up with the idea, you just have to encourage it and enable it versus, you know, stamp down on it and saying, this is not how we want you to use our product.
Dan, how does that operate in your world then?
Very often we work with artists, you know, 6 months, a year, way up front, and a lot of these artists are born out of things like MySpace and more so now with YouTube. And these guys are creating content, they're getting feedback from their fans. We can get involved at a stage when they've already got an artist presence online on various platforms, and again, augment that by some A&R expertise and some marketing expertise. But very much we're incubating those ideas along with those artists and allowing them to be at the forefront of that discussion.
I was wondering though, when you look to sign artists now and your people go out to look for them, if they're not artists that you think would actually be comfortable or lend themselves to this 360 degrees, you'd be less likely to take them now then?
I think there's two sides to that. There's the creativity of an artist, and with those there's digital platforms that can afford new and different opportunities. But there's also how we approach it in terms of, you know, artists can be very enigmatic and intriguing. With certain artists, we have to kind of take a step back. With some people, the fans are really interested in what they do every minute of every day, and with others, you know, we still want to have the intrigue and mystery that I think surrounded artists 20, 30 years ago when you couldn't get all this information at your fingertips. So I think it's a balance of how you work with these artists, what the rights exploitation opportunities are, and getting the right approach with them. It's a collaborative process.
Not on the Life in the Day, Kevin, but going back to Eagle, which of course it was really, well, not the whole idea of this kind of strange legion that was disappeared in Scotland.
A more conventional movie.
Yes. But did you do a lot of 360 degree around that as well?
No, I mean, I don't know if I totally agree with everything that's being said here. I mean, obviously in a slightly different world, all these guys, because I still think there is a place for passive entertainment. I still want to pick up a book and be told a story. I still want to read a newspaper and have an expert tell me what to think about what's going on in Libya, as opposed to just reading a lot of blogs or, and in the same way, I think that people have said for many, many years now that with the advent of cheap digital technology, that movie making is going to change radically, that anyone can go out and make a movie, you can cut it on your laptop. Well, I haven't seen a huge boom in fantastic low-budget movies. I think there are probably less good movies made now than there were 20 years ago. So you have to ask, you know, something else is going on. We all yearn for a great new TV show or a great new movie or whatever it is, but there aren't really any more of those now than there were before.
But I mean, the difference is that this is the seed. Before that, you know, you would have no reaction. People would pay to see the movie, and that's it. Now you have websites,
but that seed has to grow.
Around it.
But in the same way as Jürgen has Lego, and as he said, he gets tremendous loyalty from the people who use it. You have to have Lego to begin with. You have to have parts of the Caribbean or whatever it is that people like and enjoy and feel that is worth then us discussing and being around. That thing that's at the center is a story and is created not by a group, it's created by a few individuals or one individual. And so I think it's easy to forget that component, you know, without that there is just chatter, but there has to be something to chatter about.
I think that's exactly right. I think the real trick, isn't it, is that it's making the experience converge. So you're all, in a sense, sharing an experience about one of your films or about a TV show or Lego or whatever, but that you don't all have to interact with it in exactly the same place. So you can enjoy the television show for what it is, have a parallel experience if you wish. And we've all shouted at the telly or at the newspaper. Now you've got a forum where you can do that. And I think that's what's exciting, that you let that build up, but don't confuse it and sort of put it all in one box. I think technology now allows us to have all these parallel experiences. But you're right, at the end of the day, that's why I think for creative people, it's incredibly exciting because you're at the center of all that. And if you decide to give up and go home, then the world's a poorer place and none of these things can actually really sort of function. So you're right, I think it makes you more important.
Just checking, anybody for a quick question? Yes, please.
How you doing? So I'm Babs Rangaya from Unilever on the marketing side. A couple of years ago, I saw during the Obama election, we saw Tina Fey imitate Sarah Palin, and I think for the first time ever, we saw more viewership outside of the show itself on Saturday Night Live on online areas. So my question is this. So entertainment seems to be coming from all different places now, and in the future, do you guys see the possibility of marketers working more directly with content creators versus the networks or distributors, so that regardless of where people are taking in content, your messages will still be attached? Because if now viewership is going to be seen in all these different places, you don't want to miss out on that contact with people. Where do you see that going? With Tim from Endemol, I think that would make sense for you, but also not just television shows, but across the board. What kind of opportunities is there for that? Is that something I should be considering and thinking about as we move forward in our plans?
Tim?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it's exactly where we want to be heading. It is, of course, slightly a question of economics, because it's how you challenge, in television terms, it's how you challenge the existing model. I mean, for some time now, we've had the notion of producers and content creators getting into bed with products and brands and advertisers. Now that challenges the existing model, so it's a difficult area, and none of us have really found a way of making much money from that yet, to be frank. But going forward, you're absolutely right. I mean, in the end, creating, as I said earlier, creating a channel is now a very different thing to what it was before. You can actually create a destination online that people can come to, and we're very excited about the prospect of new economic models and looking at how that works. I think it is, though, ultimately a question of just getting those economics right, because making television or making content is an expensive business, and it's a risky business, and we've all got to be aware of those risks, as we get together. But no, I'm all for that.
And a question from that microphone.
Hello, I'm Michael Aiden. I'm General Manager of Evian Water within Groupe Danone. And I have a candid question for Dan from EMI. It seems that all the industries that you guys are representing here have sort of reinvented themselves through digital and have been pretty successful at doing so. Now, at a time where probably more people than ever are listening to music, and there are more and more occasions to listen to music than ever before, it seemed the only industry that is really, really suffering from this change is the music industry. So how can you explain, where did it go wrong, and do you think that there are ways of turning that around in the future?
Okay, in 1 minute, where did it go wrong?
I think, we've learned a lot of lessons. I think, we've listened a lot. We were probably the first industry to be hit hard by piracy, but I think we have bite-sized content, so that was probably one of our issues and meant that we were there at the start of the piracy issues. But I think we've changed. I think we were the first major to adopt DRM, free audio. We listened to consumers and what they wanted. We've been the first to embrace new models with our artists in terms of the rights that we acquire. And I think that we're very much embracing partnerships, distribution, new business models, new opportunities. It's quite a complex business in the way that our rights set up with the artists and the contracts that we have. But we're moving towards, that George Osborne was talking earlier, around open APIs and relinquishing control of our content through hackathons and through APIs that we want to work in a controlled environment with developers. I do think it's difficult, but I do think that we're positioned uniquely, as I mentioned earlier, as a rights management company to now try and work with partners in that way to try and distribute our content in a more innovative and creative way.
Well, with that, could you please, ladies and gentlemen, thank our panel. Thank you very much.